The night was quiet, save for the intermittent beeping of the medical equipment and the soft shuffling of the nurse's shoes on the glossy floor. My colleague and I were in the middle of our rounds when we noticed that the call lights were going off in empty rooms. We exchanged a puzzled look and made our way down the hallway, checking each room one by one. But every time we entered a room, the call lights stopped flashing and there was no one there. We began to feel uneasy, and I suggested that we check the security cameras to see if someone was playing a trick on us. As we entered the security room, I couldn't help but notice how different it felt from the rest of the hospital. The walls were whitewashed wood, and there were various paintings hanging on the walls, adding a touch of warmth and personality to the room. I sat down in front of the monitor and started scanning through the footage. It was then that I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There on the screen was a figure dressed in all white, walking down the hallway with an old school nurse hat on their head. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I quickly called over my colleague to look at the monitor. "What in the world?" she exclaimed, staring at the monitor in disbelief. "Who could that be?" We sat there watching the figure on the screen as they walked down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. It was clear that there was no one there in real life, and yet there was someone on the screen. "I don't like this," my colleague said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This doesn't feel right." I nodded in agreement. Something was definitely amiss, and we both knew it. My colleague and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over us as we watched the footage of the mysterious figure on the monitor. We both knew that something wasn't right, but we couldn't quite put our finger on what it was. As we continued to watch the footage, we noticed that the figure seemed to be heading towards the room at the end of the hallway, where a patient who had recently passed away was staying. My colleague and I exchanged a worried look, and without a word, we made our way to the room. When we got there, we found the door slightly ajar. We pushed it open and peered inside. The room was empty, except for the bed where the patient had been lying. But something was off. The sheets were rumpled and twisted, as if someone had been lying there only moments before. "That's strange," my colleague said, her brow furrowed in confusion. Just then, we heard a noise coming from the hallway. We cautiously stepped out of the room and saw the figure in white, standing at the end of the hallway. She turned towards us, and I could see that she was wearing an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, complete with a hat and cape. My colleague and I stood frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. She started walking towards us, and we could hear her footsteps echoing through the hallway. As she got closer, we could see that her face was obscured by a surgical mask, but her eyes were piercing and seemed to be looking straight through us. Without warning, she suddenly disappeared, leaving us standing alone in the hallway, our hearts pounding in our chests. "What the hell was that?" my colleague asked, her voice trembling. "I have no idea," I replied, my mind racing with questions and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The image of the old school nurse walking down the hallway in her pristine white uniform and hat wouldn't leave my mind. I had to know what was going on. I spent hours reviewing the security footage, combing through each and every frame for any sign of the mysterious figure. I watched as staff members went about their routines, patients sleeping soundly in their beds, but there was no sign of the nurse. My frustration grew as the night wore on, until finally I decided to take matters into my own hands. I got up from my desk and headed out into the hallway, determined to find out what was going on. The hallway was eerily quiet. The only sound was a soft hum of the air conditioning. I walked slowly, peering into each room as I went. All was still, and I was beginning to think I was just imagining things, when I heard a faint rustling sound coming from one of the rooms. I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, half expecting to see the old school nurse staring back at me. But the room was empty. The only movement coming was from the fluttering of the curtains that were being blown by the breeze. Frustrated and unnerved, I continued my search. I spent the next hour checking every inch of the ward, but there was no sign of the nurse. Eventually, I gave up and headed back to the nurse's station, defeated. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I turned around, half expecting to see the nurse behind me, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway stretching out before me. We later found out no one has worn those uniforms in 30 years. I stood outside of my garage, taking a few drags from my cigarette to calm my nerves before heading inside. As I exhaled a cloud of smoke, I noticed a figure sitting in a chair nearby. I squinted in the low light, trying to make out the person's features. As I approached, I could see that he was a middle-aged man, his face contorted in a drunken stupor. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused, and started talking about someone named George. I had no idea what he was going on about, and confusion etched across my face. "Do you have company?" I asked, my voice laced with skepticism. The man lurched to his feet, wobbling unsteadily on his feet. He disappeared inside the garage, and I could hear him rummaging around before he emerged, holding a small box. "George," he repeated, holding the box out to me. I took a step back, feeling a chill run down my spine. I had no idea what was inside the box, and I didn't want to find out. The man stumbled away, leaving me alone in the darkened garage, my mind reeling with questions and fear. I quickly made my way inside, closing the door behind me and locking it securely. A few days after my encounter with the drunken man, I went for a walk with my husband, leaving the garage door open. As we made our way back home, I noticed a message from the man on my phone. "I left a gift for you in your garage," the message read. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What kind of gift could he have possibly have left for me? We hurried back to the house, and I made my way to the garage, feeling a sense of dread settle in my stomach. As I stepped inside, my eyes scanned the space, taking in the stained floor, our brown walls, and the varieties of paintings that hung on them. And then I saw it. A giant Easter egg, about 4 feet tall, sat in the center of the room. I approached it hesitantly, my hands shaking as I reached out to touch it. The shell was smooth and cool to the touch, with intricate designs etched into the surface. I pried it open, revealing a plethora of camping gear inside. I felt a sense of disbelief wash over me. What kind of gift was this? Why would someone leave me camping gear inside a giant Easter egg? I turned around to see my husband standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and amusement. We both chuckled nervously, unsure of what to make of the bizarre situation. I was lying in bed when I heard the sound of banging on our front door. My heart raced as I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to see who it was. It was him, the man who had been acting so strangely. He was drunk and stumbling around on our front porch, banging on the door and shouting my name. I turned to my husband, who was still fast asleep. Wake up, I hissed, shaking him by the shoulder. "What's going on?" he mumbled groggily. "That man is here, the one who left the weird Easter egg in our garage. He's drunk and he won't leave." My husband sat up, fully awake now. "Okay, stay here. I'll go deal with him," he said. He grabbed his robe and headed for the door as I watched from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see him talking to the man, his voice low and firm. The man continued to shout and stumble around, but eventually my husband managed to get him to leave. The next day, my husband and I decided to move. I was sitting in my studio, surrounded by my latest art project, when my phone buzzed. It was Valentine's Day, and I assumed it was just another notification from one of my social media accounts. But when I looked at my phone, I saw that it was a text message from an unknown number. "Happy Valentine's Day, my secret admirer," the text read. I was confused, but I assumed it was just one of my friends playing a prank on me. After all, I was in a room with a handful of tech-savvy people at the time. I tried to gauge their reactions and asked if anyone was messing with me. They all denied it, and I believed them. The studio was a spacious room and was filled with my latest artworks, hung in various sizes and styles. There were varieties of paintings, including Impressionism, Surrealism, and abstract art. I was trying to work on a piece that could resemble all 3 categories. As I was admiring the painting, my phone buzzed again. It was the same unknown number. "Is this?" the voice on the other end asked, pronouncing my name correctly. "Yes. Who is this?" I replied, hoping I could identify the voice. At that point, the person hung up and resumed texting. The message started to get personal, and I began to feel uneasy. The person kept asking me if I was doing something that night and wanted to meet up. They were also sending me various images from a separate email. I became more curious than scared, and decided to figure out who was behind these messages without giving away anything about myself. So I texted them back for a while and dug more information about the person. compiling it into a profile and eliminating possibilities. Unfortunately, this just encouraged them, as they insisted I send pictures. Days passed, and the texts kept coming, each one more personal and intrusive than the last. The username I discovered belonged to someone who seemed to know a lot about me, from my favorite foods to my daily routine. It was both creepy and intriguing at the same time, but it was the text about the wedding dress that really shook me. It was one thing to receive random messages from someone you don't know, but it was another to receive a picture of a wedding dress, and not just any wedding dress, but one that the person claimed that she would use on our wedding day. I couldn't help but wonder who this person was and what their endgame was. Did they really believe that I was going to marry them just because they'd sent me a picture of a dress, or were they just trying to freak me out? The next day, I decided to do some investigating. I called the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried sending a text, but it was immediately blocked. It was clear that this person didn't want to be found. As the day wore on, my anxiety grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that this mysterious texter was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to slip up. That evening, I received another text. It was a picture of a party flyer with the message, "I'll be at this party tonight. You should come." I knew better than to give in to their demands, but my curiosity got the best of me. I decided to scope out the party from a distance, just to see if I could catch a glimpse of this mysterious texter. As I arrived at the party, I scanned the crowd, trying to identify anyone who might be the culprit, but no one stood out, and I soon realized that I was wasting my time. I decided to leave the party and head back to my dorm. As I walked down the street, I felt a chill in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Suddenly, I heard a rustling behind me. I turned around to see a figure in the shadows, dressed all in black. For a moment, my heart stopped, but then I realized it was just a passerby. I had spent the better part of the day poring over the information I had gathered on my mysterious admirer. I had narrowed down the possible suspects, and my gut told me it was someone I knew, but I couldn't be sure. As the evening drew near, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been building inside me for days. I was at work when I received another text from the unknown number. They were insistent that we meet up, and I was determined to get to the bottom of things, once and for all. I agreed to meet with them, but on my terms. I chose a public place, a cafe in the heart of the city, and waited for my admirer to arrive. As I sipped my coffee and watched the people passing by, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if it was someone I knew, someone close to me? My mind raced with possibilities, but I couldn't let fear consume me. I had to face this head on. And then she walked in. It was the last person I ever expected to see. A girl from my high school, someone I had barely spoken to in years. She was shy, introverted, and not at all the type to send anonymous love messages. But as I looked at her, I saw something in her eyes that made my heart sink. She sat down across from me, fidgeting nervously with her hands. I could tell she was terrified, but I didn't understand why. Why? I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you do this? She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and regret. I just wanted you to notice me, she said, her voice cranking. I've had a crush on you since high school, but I was too scared to tell you. When I found out you were single, I couldn't resist. I never meant for things to get this out of hand. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. Here was a girl who had spent years pining after me, and I had never known. And now, because of my own curiosity, her secret was out for the world to see. I didn't know what to say to her. All I could do was sit there, staring at her in disbelief. Finally, I stood up and walked out of the cafe, leaving her sitting there alone.